Dear colleagues, good afternoon. I'm very happy to welcome you all at our first international online seminar of the Valdai Club with most important foreign political partners of Russia. This year, we were planning Russian-Indian conference, and of course, we will hold it offline later. But we discussed it with our esteemed partners from Observer Research Foundation, that now is the time when it would be relevant to discuss most heated questions in an online manner, and it will have a symbolic significance. Because there is a big threat when you stop communication, because in this case you don't have an understanding of mutual interests, so you're not on the same page. So we do need communication in these difficult times. On a daily basis, we receive a lot of news that tell us that everything is terrible, there is crisis around the world, and there is confrontation between the US and China. And maybe now is the time for Russia and India, who have always had great relations with each other, to discuss most relevant questions related to foreign policy and economy. And based on this discussion, all of us will have an idea what to write about and what to say, and we will have mutual understanding. We will be on the same ground. And this is the main contribution of our discussion, and we will understand what's ruling right now in international relations. We have 1 hour and 30 minutes today. We have two main speakers today. Is the senior research fellow Nivedita Kapoor, junior fellow of Observer Research Foundation, Nivedita Kapoor. Hello, Nivedita. And Vasily Kashin, Senior Research Fellow, Center for European International Studies, Higher School of Economy, and a Research Fellow of 1,000 other organizations, as far as I understand. He is one of the best Russian Oriental Studies researcher, and he's very much in demand. And we also have other participants who were very kindly agreed to take part in our event today. They're our panelists. And colleagues are trusting me to become a moderator today. So we have a few questions to discuss for this discussion. We all received these questions in advance, so I will not read them out loud. We are working in two languages, in Russian and two languages, Russian and English, with interpretation. And I believe it's gonna work fine. Every speaker has a maximum 10 minutes per presentation and 5 minutes per every other panelist. After that, we can take a round of questions. We can ask questions to each other, and we even have 2 questions from our external listeners, from mass media, and from other researchers. So right now, I wanted to give the floor to Nivedita Kapoor from Observer Research Foundation. Nivedita, over to you.
Thank you, sir. So I will jump the historical legacy of the Indo-Russia relationship and the trust that exists in this relationship. Over the years, we have seen both the countries change domestically and also deal with the changes that are happening externally, which is on the global front. And they have tried to navigate their bilateral relationship in the midst of all of these changes. So as a result, there are the two dimensions of the Indo-Russia relationship that both the countries have been trying to negotiate. So the first is the internal dimension that directly impacts their bilateral engagement. And the second is the external dimension that relates to their positioning in the international system and how that has the potential to impact their relationship. So today I will try to highlight these two dimensions and explore as to how the pandemic might have an impact on both of these dimensions. So first, in terms of the bilateral dimension, I think we need to take off from where the 2019 bilateral summit in Vladivostok left us. because both the leaders, President Putin and Prime Minister Modi, said that this is the time to focus on the economic relationship. It was decided that the bilateral trade should reach $30 billion by 2025. Very ambitiously, both the countries said that we will explore the idea of a Chennai-Vladivostok maritime link. And India also said that it would extend a $1 billion line of credit to the Russian Far East. So now the problem is we're at a time when our focus was economic relations and our economies were already now doing very well. It was said that the $30 billion trade target was already a little unreasonable. But at the same time, there was some confidence that if the Russian Far East investment picks up, it might take us to that target. But as a result of this global pandemic, it's unclear if our economy, both the Indian and the Russian economies, are projected to do not so well because of the global recession. Direct impact will have once again on the economic ties that was already the weakest link in our bilateral relationship. So how do we deal with that? At the same time, the Chennai-Vladivostok maritime link, the feasibility study has not yet been conducted. So while we understand the strategic importance of this link, India is looking at expanding its options in East Asia. It's also looking at the future with a view of the Arctic route. But at present, because the feasibility study has not been conducted, we are unsure as to the economic dimensions of that route. The $1 billion line of credit, from what I have heard from officials here in India, till now we're still waiting for the Indian businesses to start expressing an interest. So only when we see that happen will we have enough data set to see how effective it has been. Again, our connectivity with INSTC, the entire route is still not operational. The issue with Iran sanctions keeps coming up. But if you look at these issues, they are not particular just to the pandemic. These issues have existed even before the pandemic hit. What the pandemic is expected to do is exacerbate these trends in the Indo-Russia relationship. So, for instance, there were other economic bottlenecks that we've been looking at. The bilateral investment treaty is not yet complete. The green corridor is still being negotiated. The tariff issues, the customs issues, these have existed for a long time. So the question now is, would the pandemic push the Indian and the Russian governments to remove these bottlenecks in order to push the economic relationship? Or 5 years down the line, or would we still be arguing the same thing, that the economic relationship is again the weakest link in the Indo-Russia relationship? The energy ties, which have been going pretty well for India and Russia, the demand issue is in the near term, it will definitely have an impact on the energy relationship. But because we have been looking at a longer term perspective, we do have some time to deal with the implications. But again, if I can flag the issue of the eastern route, Chennai-Vladivostok link, if the Indian oil and gas minister had said that we would be looking at importing Russian energy, oil and gas via the eastern route. Now, all our refineries that can deal with the Russian crude are on the western coast. So if you are looking at importing with the eastern route, it would not mean just imports. It would also mean an entire project that would lead to the old refineries on the eastern coast being revamped. And that is a very, very long-term project. And will the Indian government have the will to do that at this stage of its economic crisis? That is an open question. So does that mean that the Chennai-Vladivostok route gets pushed to a later date or not? So that is something that we'll have to see. So that is again an impact of pandemic that we'll have to look at. The defense sector looks a little more promising in the sense that we will be able, India has indicated that it wants to improve its domestic manufacturing, and and Russia can be a very key partner in that sense. So these are the implications sort of quickly of the bilateral relationship. Now I'll quickly come to the external dimension, which relates to the world order. Most of the scholars have been predicting that the pandemic means that the US-China rivalry intensifies. So the key impact, if that comes to fore, how does that impact the Indo-Russia relationship? It is clear that India sees Russia as a very important strategic partner. Russia's geography, its position in the UN Security Council, our historical ties, its natural resources, all of these together make Russia a very important partner. We cooperate in various areas, counterterrorism, cybersecurity, Russia supports India on Kashmir, there's UN Security Council, there's the issue of climate change. So there are several areas where we can see convergences. But what has been happening in recent years is that in response to China as a rising power in its backyard, India has turned its attention to the United States and its relations in East Asia. Similarly, Russia, because of its foreign policy compulsions, has turned to China. So in case the US-China strategic rivalry intensifies, uh, what I what I'm afraid of is that it will impact the Indo-Russia relationship in the sense of its multilateral engagement, because India and Russia interact quite extensively in areas like BRICS, in SCO, in RIC. And we were already seeing some issues in terms of the SCO and RIC have been criticized for the RIC has often been criticized for not having a very clear agenda, of not being able to come out with concrete decisions. The SCO, it's clear that the bilateral disagreements between India and China on various issues has had an impact on agenda formation. The question about BRICS relates to how does it go forward, apart from the once that the development bank has now been finalized, what are its next steps, how does it become a global player? So if the US-China rivalry intensifies, and if that forces India and Russia to take sides, that is what will negatively impact on multilateral engagement within these international institutions. But again, as has happened in the bilateral relationship, these fault lines were already visible. So this pandemic might not throw up completely new trends, but will again exacerbate those existing trends. And if India and Russia cannot find a balance in that, it will affect their multilateral engagement in a lot of ways. Again, so this is quickly about the multilateral organizations. But again, I should send a word of caution here, because at this point we are thinking that the US-China polarity would be very strong. The strategic rivalry is going to be strong. But I would remind you of the words of Kenneth Walls, who said that the response of the states would depend on the extent of the external pressure. And as of now, we are not clear about the extent of the external pressure. So, so whether the US-China bipolar rivalry is it going to be very strong, or is it going, or will it allow other states to still hedge their bets? That is something that is still up for grabs. But what is clear that India and Russia will not very clearly benefit from this rivalry, because for a long time, so if you look at the Indian foreign policy, what we had been doing was we were trying to strike a balance. So we would meet in the Russia and the China format. Again, we would meet at the same venue. We'd also meet in the Japan, America, India format. So we were trying to follow a balanced policy. But if we can no longer do that, if we can no longer hedge our bets, that would negatively impact our development goals, because at this stage, our focus is for economic development and to carve out a place for ourselves in the international system. And I suspect the same is the case with Russia. So this kind of rivalry will not be very beneficial in the long run. In the short term, we might have some tactical advantages, but we need the peace at the moment for our own economic development, and we are not doing very well. So very quickly, because I see my time is running out. So India and Russia need to understand that this is not the time for their grand plans, grand foreign policy plans. They'll have to realistically estimate as to what they can do. And in realistically estimating that they need to see if the international conditions are pushing us into sort of a rivalry. We need to identify clearly our areas, bilateral areas of cooperation, and make sure that those areas of cooperation take precedence over the areas of divergence. The areas of divergence might remain. We will have to be realistic in terms of our own foreign policy interests, but to make sure that these divergences do not overpower our areas of conflict. That will be our challenge in the near future, as I see. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nivedita. This was a perfect presentation. I wanted to make a few remarks. First of all, I was asked to remind that our discussion, you can watch it, you can view it on online platforms of Valdai Club, on Facebook, on the website of Valdai Club, on VKontakte, on Instagram and Telegram. Questions are accepted online on the email press@valdaiclub.com. Please join the discussion. Those who are not live right now, please send your questions. And next speaker is Vasily Kashin. Have an online format and we don't have much time, but it will help us be more precise, be more clear in formulating our interests and our words. Russian-Indian relations are quite deep and they are quite fundamental. And I'm sure we need to be as open and as frank as possible. It's impossible to hamper our relations because our relations are too great. We are not against each other. We are not rivals, at least for geographical reasons. And understanding each other in relation to other partners is very vital right now. Vasily Kashin, over to you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. I wanted to focus on the question how COVID-19 might impact our relations. It is possible that this impact will be quite deep, not only in terms of bilateral relations between India and Russia, but also in terms of the situation in the world. COVID-19 might have deep consequences, much deeper consequences than previous catastrophes, even those catastrophes that were followed by more financial and human casualties. The reason for this is that this pandemic has happened in different conditions. It has never happened before. If we think of the most well-known global epidemic of the 20th century, which is the Spanish flu epidemic in the 1918, 1920, the casualties were dozens of millions of people or even 50 million people. So different numbers are available. Here we can see that there are a lot of differences. The difference between these two pandemics, the Spanish flu hit the humankind in the periphery of global economy. So the most suffered countries in terms of casualties and people killed were China and India. There were numerous victims in other Asian countries and in colonies of European countries, but losses in those countries who were in the center of the global economy, such as France, the UK, and even the US, there were just hundreds of thousands. So they were much smaller compared to the people killed in other countries. And the Spanish flu happened in very specific conditions. When the pandemic started, all countries were in the end of World War One, and their economies, economical systems, and their state systems and governance systems were fully mobilized. They were very much ready, and in terms of public perception, losses of the pandemic like overlapped on the losses and the horrors of World War One, and they are perceived as one. This is why somehow the epidemic of the Spanish flu is somehow in oblivion for many people. It seems that it didn't leave any tracks in mass perception just because it overlapped with World War One or with other catastrophes of the first half of 20th century. Right now, we are in a completely different situation. First of all, we're seeing that the biggest losses COVID-19 is exerting to the countries that are the center of global economy. The US, Western European countries. And second point, 100 years ago, developed countries were mobilized to the fullest. They were ready. But now our countries were demobilized completely. All the logic of development of global economy is that in the recent few decades, we were increasing efficiency and we were reducing resilience. And we were outsourcing everything and we were relying on very complicated production chains and we were outsourcing labor force. a huge leverage and debt burden, narrow specialization, etc. It all led to a huge economic effect, a reduction of prices, but it was based on a lot of assumptions. The first assumption was there was a misbelief that a global catastrophe is impossible nowadays, and a misbelief that a global pandemic is impossible right now, that famine is impossible nowadays, and COVID-19 has done away with these misbeliefs. If one pandemic has proven to be possible and it has exerted a huge um, many casualties, so thousands of people are dead and dozens of thousands of people um, have incurred major losses and damage to their health, and GDP has suffered significantly. So this has proven to be realistic. If it has happened once, it means it will happen again and again. The second important assumption that made modern economic model possible is that there was a misbelief that a total conflict between leading economies is impossible. But China and the US starting to become closer to confrontation even before COVID-19, but now coronavirus has accelerated their confrontation, and it's related to the fact that the logic of American internal policy at the backdrop of what happened in the country is pushing many political forces to acute foreign conflict with China, uh, to holding it guilty for what has happened. On the other hand, we see that there's a reciprocal growth of nationalists in China, and they are supporting their flag, and they are changing the style of Chinese diplomacy. They have become more harsh. Sometimes Chinese are even switching to some personal insults towards some American officials. And some time ago, it would not be realistic. So there is an escalation of this conflict and an increase of nationalism and hostility on both sides, and it might lead to mutually destructive economic measures. For example, American production sites might fly away from Chinese. Protectionism might have a rise, and sanctions might get imposed. So we might get faced with the threat of structural restructure of global economy and global politics as well, and maybe we will face abrupt reduction of interdependence between different countries and a rise of confrontation between different countries. And in this case, the peculiarity of Russia and India is that our countries are going to determine the result of the US Chinese confrontation. And the key role that Russia and India are playing right now is obvious to many, both in the US and in China. Our situation, our position brings a lot of opportunities, but it's also quite dangerous. So it's very logical, it's very possible that we need to activate our political consultations, we need to hold political coordination, and we need to think about practical cooperation areas where we would cooperate more, where we would expand our cooperation, especially given that we do not perceive each other as threat. We don't have major conflict of interest in national interests. And we have traditional cooperation areas such as military technical cooperation and nuclear area cooperation. Overall, in technologies related to national security and national defense, this is an obvious area that we need to expand in these turbulent times, because it will increase our strategic independence and autonomy. It will help us feel more autonomous. We must move forward towards wider economic cooperation because the structure of economic ties will become increasingly not stable. We cannot be certain about anything. This is why we need to think where we could complement each other, where we could change the mechanisms of financial cooperation, where we could exchange investments. Maybe we should boost cooperation in high technologies. This cooperation must develop in parallel, both bilaterally and in multilateral cooperation. First of all, in BRICS, within BRICS, there is a number of initiatives here that relate to cooperation in industry, environment, development, or urban development. And I think that many of them deserve some review because these formats will determine much more than they would determine in the past. A lot will depend on them. At least we are dealing with countries that have a lot of mutual interest. Overall, I believe that in the new situation, in the new conditions, we have extended opportunities for cooperation, uh, not only in military technical cooperation, and I guess that the main area will be technologies, um, civil technologies, and financial cooperation. Thank you very much. This concludes my speech. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Vasily. Both of our speakers have touched upon both bilateral relations and global context, global relations. I think this gives us a great foundation for a discussion. To begin with, I cannot agree with one of the points that Vasily has mentioned. You're saying that a reduction of interdependence, if we reduce trade and investments, it will lead to hostility and confrontation. I don't think it's true. I think the less interdependence we have, the fewer reasons for confrontation. As we know, the biggest trade before World War I was between the UK and Germany. The Roman Empire and the Chinese Empire never had wars between each other because they never had any relations. I believe Vasily supports liberal views, and this liberal dogma that interdependence is good, it might be disputed in modern conditions when we really have an opportunity to reduce interdependence. And maybe this is the way to reduce the number of areas where our interests might clash or contradict each other when we execute them. Now I wanted to hand over to Fyodor Lukyanov. Hello. I was not going to speak much today. I have 5 minutes, just 5 minutes, maybe even less. So I wanted to point out, well, first of all, yesterday we were talking about the new Valdai presentation, new Valdai paper. You can find it available on our website, and it was participated by our mutual friend. Um, and for some, it's an Indian leader, Sanyu Saran. And we discussed in detail the problems of world order. And one of the key ideas of that paper, of that report, is that we fear that global situation is inevitably going to bipolar cooperation between China and the US. It happened not because of recent events. They did not become the reason. They became just a catalyst. The confrontation just became increasingly acute. It was clear even before Trump, and when Trump came to office, it became more vivid. But the events that are happening right now, they are bringing this confrontation to a new level. We understand that some statements by Donald Trump should not be perceived literally, but he is speaking a lot about China. And yesterday, Donald Trump said that China is not the most important country. We might stop any relation whatsoever. Of course, you should not understand it literally, but this is the way he's thinking. So I believe, and in our report, we're speaking about it, that Russia and India in this situation um, and find themselves in a completely new situation. The ideas that were brought up a few years ago, like 2 years ago, in the Valdai Club, in our discussions with the Observer Research Foundation, we were discussing that we should join efforts in order not to be destroyed by this bipolar confrontation. And back then, many thought that this was not feasible, and many thought that this was made up and this was to some extent artificial. And some thought that this is a new meaning to to like staying away from a conflict. But now it becomes more relevant, and it becomes one of the tasks that we should do, because ending up in the center, in the midst of this confrontation. One is the old superpower, and the other one is a new superpower. Obviously, it's not among our interests, neither in Moscow nor in Delhi. And Indian, and the main point of view is so what I wanted to say here is I'm thinking about the interview of Mr. Putin 7 years ago, 7 or 6 years ago. He gave a big interview on the TV, and he was asked about relations between China and the US. So it was much earlier, before the acute phase of their relations. And Putin stated back then that the world has two countries right now that are either directly or indirectly um, pretend willing to become world superpowers. And he said, thank God we are not among them. We are not trying to become a global superpower. Later, he made different statements, and his words were more balanced, because we understand that Chinese partners respond to these words. They're very sensitive to these words. But 1.5 years ago, or maybe a year ago, in St. Petersburg Forum, Mr. Putin repeated these words right in front of Xi Jinping. He made a joke. He said that there is a Chinese joke about a Chinese monkey who is watching a tiger who is doing what he wants. Xi Jinping didn't like it, obviously. He neutralized it, of course, and he said that it was a joke, and Mr. Putin said that it was a joke, but actually, it reflects the moods that are being discussed in Moscow right now. Uh, the fact that finding ourselves in the midst of this Chinese-US confrontation is not what we want. It doesn't mean that Russia is going to be on the sidelines just like that monkey watching what's going on. And Russia obviously doesn't have any sympathy for the US in this confrontation. But at the same time, I think one of the purposes of Russian foreign policy in the nearest time is how to build the balance system, how to build the balance in order to avoid getting involved into confrontation, but on the other hand, making use of the fact that there are many other countries who also don't want to become a part of this confrontation. Different countries have different interests. Some of these interests overlap. Still, the purpose is to position yourself differently in this new bipolar world. And I believe that India and Russia, in this sense, can become a flagship in this sense. Thank you very much, Fyodor. Indeed, there are many questions right now in theory and in practice. But for instance, a question. A nuclear superpower that is capable of destroying humankind a few times, is it possible for this nuclear superpower to find itself in the midst of someone else's confrontation? On the one hand, we have military capabilities of Russia that are exceeding those of the other countries, but on the other hand, we have this confrontation gear. It's a completely new situation. The history has not seen it before, and I believe that India India is not that much armed as Russia, but India uh, does not see itself in the midst of this confrontation. India can see itself as a parallel story or parallel thing, but I believe that Nandan Unikrishnan will tell us about it, will tell us his view. Over to you, Nandan.
Uh, Thank you. A bit unexpected, but firstly, I'm very glad that we have successfully launched this online interaction. I would not waste any time on any introduction, so I'll go straight to the topic. I envy my Russian friends their clarity about the state of the world and where it is headed. I mean, broadly speaking, I can understand that India and Russia share one common view, which is that we do not want a hegemon in either this part of the world or anywhere in the world. We do not want to see a single hegemon, and maybe in that situation, a bipolar world is preferable to a single polar world. But unlike Russia, India has several other problems. Uh, to be very precise, one of those problems is that I don't think, uh, while the Indian state, the India as a country, has certain permanent national interests, I am not very certain that the current elite that rules India has the same national interest as that India. So that dissonance, it is going to take some time for that to be sorted out. And therefore, presumably, I think one of the uh, problems that we have is that the clarity that the Russian side has is not reflected by the Indian side. So because of this dissonance in India's uh, overall view of the world, because India is unclear as to what exactly is the strategy to pursue, we have arrived at a situation where we are going to pursue a transactional foreign policy. So, in other words, we are going to do everything that at a certain point of time seems to be in the national interest of India. Uh, so, therefore, I think it is a bit too early to discuss the possibility of arriving at some kind of non-aligned set of countries or great powers that are outside the mill of the two superpowers that are going to be rubbing against each other. It is undoubtedly, as someone had mentioned, going to be difficult and different from what we've had so far. But I think while the Russian side has the advantage of a clear understanding of where it is headed, the Indians still have a lot of homework to do. On the other hand, if I come specifically to the bilateral issues, one thing I'd like to say is that I don't think COVID as such significantly changes international politics. I think international geopolitics, yes, COVID is a factor, but it does not significantly change, for example, India's national interest. It just adds one more component into India's external policy, maybe, and it adds an even bigger component into India's domestic policy, which is to improve India's health services. But as a factor in international geopolitics, I don't think it will come into play unless, as a result of COVID, you have one of the great powers or several of the great powers being significantly weakened, both in terms of economy and other resources. Specifically vis-a-vis the Indo-Russian relationship, my concern is slightly different from what Vasily and Nivedita have voiced. My concern is that in the last 5 to 7 years, it is the military-industrial cooperation that has emerged as the main pillar, the spinal cord of this relationship. Today, we have a lot of projects going on. I mean, India is purchasing the S-400. There are these frigates that are supposed to be built. There is some cooperation on submarines and all. But if you project yourself to a timeline of 5 to 7 years, all these projects will be over. And I think we should be starting to think about whether there are other projects that can start replacing these if the military technical cooperation is to continue as the main pillar of the relationship, or do we have to look at bringing more elements or diversifying the elements and the components of the relationship. And in that context, I also think that the other negative factor that we have to keep in mind is that I don't think we are going to have a straightforward land route for trade for a very long time. So I would there completely agree with Vasily that we need to look at completely new and more innovative ways of engaging our economic systems, as well, particularly our financial systems. We need to look at maybe investments of joint production ventures. We need to look at a completely different way of conducting our economic relationship, unlike we have in the past. In other words, what I'm saying is that to some extent, Russia has got rid of the baggage of the 20th century and is beginning to look at the world with 21st century eyes. India, unfortunately, is mired in government systems of the 19th century, run by people with mindsets of the 20th century and wanting to break into the 22nd century. So it's a huge problem. Thank you.
Nandan told me that I should switch off the microphone when someone else is speaking. Thank you very much for your words, Nandan. Of course, Russia and India have one big project. It's called Defense and Security in Eurasia. Peace and stability in Eurasia, so that no state feels too super powerful in Eurasia. So my question is, a few days ago, Chinese newspaper Global Times published an article exerting an idea that China needs to increase its nuclear opportunities, thousands of missiles and hundreds of rockets. Nandan, we're currently having an expert discussion. Due to new problems in the world, can India consider an opportunity to increase nuclear capabilities?
Before I get into that question, if I may suggest, let us have the views of the other Indian participants, because they may not completely agree with what I said. So I'd like to hear that before I respond to this issue that deals with China. So if we could have the views of Anuradha, Ivan Safranchuk, Sanjay Deshpande, that would be appropriate. And of course,
yes, agreed.
the incomparable
Yes, agreed.
Alexei Kupriyanov.
Uh, yes, but we will. But as a moderator, I would insist on getting back to this question later. So, Alexei Kupriyanov, over to you. Yes, thank you, Timothy. I'm very happy to see you all actually, because these conferences are bringing us together in this self-isolation. Particularly, I'm happy to see my friend Nandan. But unfortunately, I would like to upset you right from the beginning. Nandan said that Russia has a clear strategy and clear vision of the world and what's going to happen next. But actually, Russia is exactly in the same situation as that of India. Most importantly, we understand that we wouldn't like to get into the meal of the conflict, and we don't want to take sides. We don't want to become a member of alliance either with the US or with China, because inevitably we will be your partner anyway. And as far as I know, India has the same point of view. India has the policy of strategic autonomy, and India is not going to sacrifice its national interests for the sake of interests of another country. I think this is what brings us together. It's hard for me to speak right now, actually, because I don't want to repeat the views that have already been mentioned in the report that we prepared. It was a report about the fact that we should stay away from this confrontation. We should not take sides. But confrontation is growing, it's getting more acute. And the only thing I can recommend is to download this presentation from Wild Eye Club and read it, because there's nothing new that I would add there right now. I do not agree that the pandemic of COVID-19 will not impact our relations. I think it will impact our relations in a few aspects. First, India and Russia, we have one cooperation field that's underdeveloped. It's cooperation, or it's production of medicines and um, medical devices. Russia, just like India, is an exporter of medical devices and medicines. And the time has shown that this is one of the most beneficial cooperation fields. We should work together in pharmaceutical industry and medical devices. And this, obviously, this is not the last pandemic in the world, and it has proven that it will repeat. So we must get ready. So cooperation in terms of production of medicine, production of medical devices, medical equipment, exchange experience, sharing best practices, anything that's possible in this way could become that it will, so it has the potential to become one of the pillars of our economic cooperation. And I don't agree that COVID will not change economic situation in the world. I believe there will be global changes that might not be triggered by COVID. COVID is just a stimulus. COVID is just like a catalyst to the processes that were there before. For a long time, we've been witnessing that free trade in globalization has been replaced by protectionist globalization, I would call it. So countries are free trading less and less, and counting on their internal sources more and more. It means that they are losing resources to commodities and to other products, and it means that they are striving to increase their positions abroad. They are coordinating their relations with the countries that are interesting to them as source of commodity. And I believe this is what would boost further cooperation between Russia and India, because let's have a look at let's just have a look at the fields that might become promising for our cooperation. Geographic regions such as Africa. Russia has increasingly been going to Africa, and we are not planning to leave Africa. And most probably Russian involvement in Africa is going to continue, just like Indian involvement in Africa, because Africa is one of the largest markets and it's one of the largest sources of the commodity. and India is cooperating with Japan, and maybe we can execute a joint Russian-Indian Japanese project. Maybe we should cooperate non-geographically, some cyber cooperation, IT cooperation. Maybe Russia and India has a great potential in this area, and I know that no matter how hard it is to continue free trade and cooperation, no matter how harsh protectionism is, still internet is common, and all companies working online will never be nationalized. They will still be global companies, and this is the second area for our potential cooperation, internet. So I believe in current reality, we need to work together in order to coordinate our efforts both in political and economic environment in order to avoid getting involved into bipolar confrontation. I know it has been mentioned and it will be mentioned again, but it's important to emphasize it. Thank you. Alexei, thank you very much. Now I wanted to give the floor to Professor Anuradu Chinoy, Dean at the School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru. Mrs. Chinoy, over to you.
Thank you. I'm deeply honored to be here. And I'd straight off go into my hypothesis, and I would argue that there is going to be clear geostrategic and geoeconomic changes in a post-COVID world. The lessons in this world of COVID are very deep, and there's going to be a rise of protectionism. This does not mean that bilateral trade and the supply chains of globalization are going to end, but they're going to take different forms in different areas. My second point is that yes, Russia-India relations are not just fundamental, but they are foundational and they have a big base. But nonetheless, there was also a period of worry of Russia-India relations when it was felt that they were stagnating for some years. My third point is that there has been some very interesting and important development, not just recently, but since 2019, which indicate the way Russia-India relations can go in a post-COVID world, which are most welcome, but I don't know how much they have been noticed. And that is what Nandan pointed out very briefly, that the 2019 S-400 missile deal, which India has promised to buy, and in fact given an advance of 800 million to Russia already, this was a deal in the rupee-ruble trade, which is something completely different than what has happened in the last 2 decades, because this rupee-ruble trade broke down after the collapse of the Soviet disintegration. Now, to revive it, I think, was a very bold and accurate and good step. Not only that, not only was the deal done in this, but in the last meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization on March 18, the finance ministers of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, including India, Russia, welcomed a clear roadmap on trade and bonds in local currencies. Third, in the issue of national and local currency trade, in the BRICS meeting, since 2015, the BRICS Bank, the new development, has been advocating trade in national currency. And in last year, in 2019, 25% of all exchange was in local currency, which means a bypassing of the dollar. The hegemony of the dollar is being challenged, not just by China, but also by Russia, India, and India's had similar deals with Korea, with Japan, etc. So this is a very important trend, which I believe India and Russia should encourage. And I think it will give a push to Indian-Russian trade, which has stagnated and has only about $10 billion. Now, as far as the US-China rivalry is concerned, I think you can take it for granted that this is only going to deepen. Not just Trump, who is inconsistent, but Secretary of State, the Republicans at large, see China as a major threat. Now, the Democrats, however, see both Russia and China as a threat, but Trump would rather just see China as a threat. India has circumvented this, but there has been pressure like CATSA on India, and India has resisted this pressure by doing the rupee-ruble exchange, just like Iran and Venezuela also did. So I think this brings me back to the former speaker who said that there was a possibility of India exercising strategic autonomy, and I would go with that argument. And I think in that, in India having strategic autonomy, India-Russia relationship is a pivot. If India's relationships, and it is likely they will continue as they did in the past and will only deepen, that gives India strategic depth. And I think the last point, because I have very little time left, is to say that just like India has become part of the SCO and it's a founding member of the BRICS, I think India should become part of the Eurasian Economic Union, and both India and Russia should move towards that in some way. Now, Vietnam it's a huge Eurasian Economic Union, millions of people, huge amount, billions of dollars of trade, a huge potential. And in that, Vietnam has already developed agreements with the Eurasian Economic Union. So I think India and Russia should kind of push India moving into this union in some way or the other. Lastly, therefore, I think India, the other thing is why I think this is why I put so much emphasis on the Russia ruble and rupee trade is a fact that in 2019, the Indian Planning Commission white paper on India-Russia said that the Soviet India trade in rupee rubles was based on a rational choice. It was not ideological, and it benefited India. So I think there's a lot of scope for this, and I can only see it going, India-Russia relations going in a positive direction, but it also means a huge amount of political will and continuous engagement and a very vibrant and creative engagement. And in that, I would argue again for especially not just pharmaceutical companies, but the kind of engagement we had with medical colleges, with universities, with intellectual engagement, and other forms of creative engagement. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Chinoy. Over to Ivan Safranchuk now. Ivan? Ivan, are you with us? Yes, I am here. Let me welcome all our Indian friends and all my colleagues in Moscow. I will be speaking about one aspect only that we touched upon today. I wanted to speak about the impact of American-Chinese confrontation on the impact of American and Chinese confrontation on India and Russia and on our relations. A small disclaimer that American-Chinese confrontation has not become the central part of geopolicy. It's about to become, very probably that it will happen, but right now we have not arrived to a bipolar world. Like there was a bipolar world when there were the US and Soviet Union, but it's not like that right now. But I believe that it will come to this point. And now is the time to think what it will mean and what we should do. So far, while Russia and India, as far as I understand, um, while we are looking at this bipolarity of the US and China, and while we are comparing this bipolarity with what we would like to see in the world, but what did not happen. Those who wanted to see common world, perfect globalization, those who were favoring this perfect globalization, I believe they don't like this American and Chinese bipolarity because the world will become worse. If the world is formatted by American Chinese bipolarity, it's worse than perfect globalization that we've been dreaming about for the past 30 years. Those who were fearing in the last 10 years of American Chinese condominium in global affairs, American Chinese uh, cooperation, like the big two, or those who were fearing that China would exceed or outpace the US and become the world um, hegemon. Those who were fearing this or who had this concern, of course, they will be happy about American Chinese by confrontation. But I think that this is the limiting point for us. We are comparing the American Chinese bipolarity and confrontation that's about to happen with expectations of the past. We are comparing them. But we are not paying enough attention to how exactly American Chinese bipolarity is going to exist, what it's gonna consist of. And this is what's going to determine the Russian Indian response to this. And this is what's going to determine if we can do something together. I believe that in some time, when this bipolarity is there for sure, most probably we will learn two things. The first thing that we will learn is that both Russia and India have a very powerful no in global relations compared to what we thought before. I believe that Russia and India on their own uh, can try their best and stay away from taking sides. They can hedge this confrontation, and even no cooperation between India and Russia is needed here. Of course, the US will try to involve India, China will try to involve Russia, but I believe that both Russia and India must take this test on their own. If they pass this test, if our countries stay um, independent, if they stay away from this bipolarity, then it will become vivid that we, the two countries, have a chance to say no to these two hegemons, and they will have nothing to do about our rejections, about our no. If it really goes smooth, if each of our countries do not make mistakes, then we will find out that we have a very powerful uh, word in this world. But at the same time, we will find out that we have a very weak yes, powerful no, but weak yes in this new bipolar world. What I mean by saying weak yes, I mean that if this confrontation gains momentum, then both Russia and India will lose the freedom to exercise independent politics. Uh, like we will have a chance to say no to what we don't want, but we will lose the freedom to do what we want, to say yes to do what we want. And in this sense, both Russia and India will lose some power in their regional policy, because those who are in Southern Asia or in Eurasia, those who are or have certain political views or political um, confrontation with India, some regional countries, they will get adjusted to bipolarity. And they will have more opportunities to interfere with what we're doing. On the other hand, if there are countries in our regions that we're trying to put pressure on or that we are influencing, they will also get a chance to make use of US-Chinese confrontation. So in case if yeah, US-Chinese confrontation gains momentum, we will learn that we have a very powerful no, but a very weak yes. We will have a chance to stay away from bipolarity, but we will have a weaker opportunity to pursue our own independent policy. And I believe that Russia and India will learn it with or without any cooperation. And then we will be faced with the question, is it possible for us to find some strategies uh, to make use, to monetize this powerful no and weak yes in the new world? And maybe in this sense, Russia and India will need a bilateral cooperation. But the forms of cooperation that we are referring to right now, such as to play on contradictions between Russia and China, or like that monkey just watching the confrontation, or to try and trigger more confrontation between the US and China, or to create some movement of not taking sides, or to promote some global institutions such as BRICS. I believe none of this will work. I think that Russia and India, first separately, and then, in case of our strategies match, then together, we will search for new ways to resolve this situation in order to make use, in order to monetize our powerful no. It's going to be kind of a veto, a right of veto for some global matters. But we will have a reduced opportunity to act on our own globally. So in order to compensate for or to find some to make them complementary, this powerful no and the weaker yes, maybe Russia and India will find common grounds to cooperate. Thank you very much. It was very much on the side on the side of philosophy. We almost exhausted our time, and Nadan says that he needs to leave us at 1:30 Moscow time sharp. Sanjay Deshpande, are you still with us?
Yes, yes,
Mr. Deshpande, over to you. The
yes,
floor is yours.
yes. It's honor to be here. I'm thankful to Valdai Club and Observer Research Foundation for this opportunity. It's a welcome roundtable, so we can discuss so many issues, particularly Indo-Russian relations. This, as everyone is witnessing now, the unprecedented situation as it is grappling with the onslaught of a virus called corona, and this will impact the world order. I have no doubt in that. And society polity will undergo a change. I disagree with my dear friend Nandan that the economic impact of this war against the coronavirus is going to be beyond imagination, because most of economic activities everywhere in the world have come to a halt. The role of most of the regulatory bodies has not been up to the desired level, so they need to be restructured. It is clear that there is going to be a realignment of the world order once we have successfully combated this deadly COVID-19. And I think and not only think, I'm sure that post-COVID-19 international relations will reset the world order from globalization to complete digitalization, so that whenever there is a outbreak of any pandemic or biological warfare, the economy should not unaffected. But this has a negative impact also. We should understand that negative impact and negative aspect also. This move, of course, will lead to a massive unemployment around the world. I will not go into detail about the on Indo-Russian relations, particularly Nandan and my colleague Professor Shina and other speakers have spoke about the defense ties, the economic ties. But one thing is that the economic ties has not been improved as expected, and this is just 13 to 14 billion dollars. But I do hope that. The INSTC will surely boost the economic relations between the two countries. As Nandan rightly said, there is no geographical connection between the two regions. And I will come directly to the last point. I will not touch upon other aspects and the energy also. As regards to the direct effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on the bilateral relations of the two countries, India's external affairs minister has maintained contact with his counterpart in Moscow and discussed number of bilateral issues. Both the sides also help each other to deal with the effects of the pandemic of this pandemic. Russia expressed its gratitude for India's decision to supply key drugs to fight the disease. Rasabaron Export donated $2 million to India's Prime Minister's Special Fund for fighting the crisis. COVID-19 crisis has accelerated the competition between China and the region, but it will not make, I am making the point, it will not make negative impact on Indo-Russian relations, because these relations are time-tested. They have a long history. They have cultural and historical roots, and surely this will not make a negative impact on Indo-Russian relations. Despite various international and regional dynamics, the maturity of Indo-Russian relations provide leverage space will remain the same as usual. Please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Deshpande. Unfortunately, we couldn't hear the last minute of your presentation, but I hope that the record will be there and we will have a chance to get back to what you said. Thank you very much for your words. Dear colleagues, we have exhausted the time almost, but Nandan is texting me that he wants to take the question that I asked. This is why let me exercise my right of the moderator and let us get back to this question. I can hear. Nobody can hear.
Yeah, no, I'm back. I do agree. I saw that editorial in Global Times, which spoke of the need for China, or advocated the need for China to increase its nuclear force and to increase its capacities. Well, one is that I think that right now this is a fringe view in China. So I don't think that the Chinese leadership at this point of time wants to embark on the road of an arms race. The second point is purely from a perspective of the Indian security establishment. China expanding its nuclear force several fold will be a nightmare for India, because whether India will be able to match it in corresponding increase is a question at this point of time, particularly given the economic hit that we have taken as a result of COVID-19. Third, I would suspect that even my Russian friends would be slightly worried if China was to rapidly increase its nuclear arsenals. But that, at this point of time, in my opinion, is a theoretical option. In reality, I don't think the Chinese leadership is going to embark on that path. For the simple reason that it will come under increasing pressure, even if it embarks on that path, it will come under increasing pressure then to join international talks on controlling, on international arms control talks. Something China at this point of time is not interested in joining and is happy to leave that to Russia and the United States. I hope, Timothy, that answers your question.
Yes, thank you very much. It's a very deep answer. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions? Does anyone want to ask any questions? Okay. We have a question to Alexei Kupriyanov from a journalist. Somebody wanted to ask something. Mrs. Chinoy, did you want to ask something or comment on something?
Yes, I just want to, I just had one comment. I think that many of our Russian colleagues made a reference to a possibility of a bipolar world. So far, Russia, India, and China have been arguing for a multipolar world. But if the Chinese and the Americans believe, and there was a possibility that the Chinese would be happy to be accommodated as a G2 with the US, but definitely the United States are not comfortable with a G2 situation, and if China and the US go into a bipolar situation, I think China would have very few allies. So I still believe that the possibility of a multipolar world is much more likely, because I don't see China having the kind of alliance that the US can have vis-a-vis like NATO, etc. Not even Russia, who is now in a deep strategic relationship. And there again, this was mentioned earlier, would like to be in a bipolar kind of situation on China's side. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Now a question to Alexei Kupriyanov about transportation. What do you see any potential in transportation area, and what could be the developments in this area? Yes. First of all, I wanted to find out what exactly the question is about. I know it's difficult to do it because we're not online with journalists. As to transportation production, I would say that the most promising is production of helicopters. Russian helicopters produced in India, MiG, etc. The segment is already established, and Russian military and military transportation helicopters are already being produced there. As to transportation corridors, we have a prospective corridor between north and south, but we haven't heard about it for a long time because in the last year, Iran has been under big pressure by the US, and whether it's possible to use Iran as an area for connection between India and Russia, it's a big question. But it opens a lot of perspectives for us in terms of marine connection between Vladivostok and Chennai. Unfortunately, the question is very general, so it's difficult for me to find any more specific answer. Thank you, Alexei. Dear colleagues, I believe that based on the discussion today, where we'll make a brief analytical report. We will distribute it among the participants, and we will hold similar events regularly just to be on the same page. Maybe we will need to specify questions to ourselves that we need to answer, but today was the first meeting of a kind, and now we know what it's like, and what now we are a little bit on the same page in terms of global crisis and pandemic crisis. If we have no more questions to our speakers and panelists, or if nobody wants to have a word, then I'm looking at the time. We took a little bit less than an hour and a half, and I wanted to say thank you to all the participants. It was very exciting, and I believe that together with the Observer Research Foundation, we will try our best to hold another meeting. For now, we will keep on holding them online until we have the pleasure of getting back to offline. Thank you very much to everyone. And in case if someone failed to have a word, then I bring my apologies.